Special episode of Outdrank the Coverage, the live draft show, is brought to you by the Frisco Bar and Grill. They're located at 6750 Gaylord Parkway, Suite 120 in Frisco. You can find them online at thefriscobar.com. I'm telling you, folks, if you're a sports fan, a karaoke fan, or a fan of live music and trivia, this is the place you want to be. They not only have great food, great drinks, they have great prices, and they have a great atmosphere. I'm telling you, this is where old friends meet and new friends are found. I promise you, you will love the Frisco Bar and Grill. Intern Nohe and I will be talking about it during the draft show, but we love their appetizers. We love their wings. I love their sliders. My girlfriend loves the karaoke. Hey, if you're a fan of Oklahoma Sooners or San Francisco 49ers, the Frisco Bar and Grill is the official watch party place for both of those. And intern Nohe and I was there for a Monday night game last year when San Francisco was playing, and the atmosphere is absolutely amazing. You cannot beat it. So check out the Frisco Bar and Grill, located at 6750 Gaylord Parkway, Suite 120 in Frisco, where old friends meet. Is your demanding work lifestyle in need of fire-resistant clothing that can keep up? Well, L4FR clothing should be your go-to for quality, affordability, safety, and style. L4FR was founded by a third-generation oil field worker who is also a veteran. Thus, this company has a deep appreciation for reliability and longevity, all while we provide first-rate customer service. Our durable apparel will serve you well for many years to come, whether you're working on a pipeline, a lineman climbing utility poles, or in any other environment requiring fire-resistant apparel. L4FR has you covered. Our apparel is tough enough to resist hazardous conditions while still providing high comfort and style. L4FR provides clothing options to ensure your safety and comfort, whether you're on the job or not. To view our complete inventory of flame-resistant garments, please visit our online store at l4frclothing.com or give us a call at 817-757-4935. Si habla español.
I'm going to start, man. Let's go, let's go.
The Dallas Cowboys entered the season as world champions and sought to become the first team to reach the Super Bowl 5 times. They are the Notre Dame of professional football, a national team whose popularity extends from coast to coast. No matter where the Cowboys travel, there are always friends to greet them. Their players are heroes to the young, and their success and style has gained them a following across the United States. Cowboy goals are lofty. Win the National Football Conference title and then the Super Bowl. This is usually attainable, for as their fans well know, the sum total of their stars make up a galaxy.
Now, what if I told you the Dallas Cowboys would not win another Super Bowl until 1992? Hello, everybody. Terry Bennett, intern Nohe. Outdrank the Coverage, a look back as we bridge the years between the 1977 Super Bowl team and the 1992 Super Bowl team, and we're doing it in two parts. This one is the 78 to 85 team, and then in the next month in June, we'll record the 86 to 91 team and talking about this. And this one holds a special place in my heart because this is the Cowboys I grew up on. But before all that, intern Nohe, how are you doing and what are you drinking?
Mr. Terry, I'm doing fantastic. And today I am drinking an old fashioned.
And I'm drinking vodka. Simple as that. And we got good food.
Yes.
Studio girlfriend has made us some meatballs, some nachos, you made some wings. Because we realized, so if you don't know, when we record these, we do 3 at a time. So we're out drinking the coverage. Basically, it's like 3 p.m. on a Saturday, and we started at like 10 a.m. And so we need some food to help us through. But I got to tell you, dude, when I think of the Cowboys, I love the 90s teams, of course. But when I think of the Cowboys, I think you think of it when you were a kid.
Yeah.
This is that era. The Randy Whites, the Harvey Martins, the Too Tall Jones, Tony Dorsett. Not really Roger Staubach for me because I was 5 years old when he retired.
Yeah.
But the Danny Whites, which we'll talk about coming in. But for all the talk of the 71 team and the 77 team, this right here, this video, what I played at the beginning and what you're watching now, This is America's team. This is what started it. And Bob Ryan, not the sports writer, but Bob Ryan, who worked for NFL Films, he's the one that came up with the name. That's one of the biggest misconceptions is a lot of people think the Cowboys came. No, the Cowboys didn't come with that. Bob Ryan did. And when he went to Dallas and said, this is the film, they showed him, Landry didn't like it. Like, he was like, that's just putting a big old bullseye. And I love Bob Ryan legendarily said, you don't think you already have a bullseye on you? You're the Dallas Cowboys. Yeah. I want to give my first hot sports opinion on this. They weren't just America's team because they were on at 3 p.m. So if you don't know, if you haven't figured out, I don't know why you're watching this if you're not an NFL fan, but the noon games are regional games, and then 3 p.m. is usually in fact, Fox just now calls it America's Game of the Week. Yeah. And back in the day, Dallas, back before they actually put on restrictions, you could only have so many a year. Dallas was basically the 3:00 game every week, unless they went out to the East Coast. And so that's why Bob Ryan named them America's team, because they were on all the TVs in America. I think, though, what also helped is when you look at how this team was built. You had the old, and you remember, we're in the 70s. You had the old white Christian coach. You had the military veteran hero, Captain America and Roger Staubach. You had the redneck, conservative, hardworking Randy White. You had the flashy late 70s African-American and Drew Pearson, Tony Dorsett. You had the hardworking, and I say that on camera, hardworking, which is so many codes and gaslighting, for the Harvey Martins and the Too Tall Jones. You basically had all of America built into this team. And I'm not saying that other teams didn't have it, but because Dallas was, like when you think of Pittsburgh, it was always just the worker man. Yeah. They're the worker man team. Dallas was the flashy team. And I think that played so well in all of the homes of America. So it wasn't just because they were on TV, and it wasn't just because they were winning when they were on TV. I think every slice of Americana could, how do you say it? Somebody on the team that represented them. Yeah. And I think that's a huge reason why the Dallas Cowboys of the late 70s became that America's team.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very diverse team, and they also were in 5 Super Bowls in the one decade. Yeah.
And then in NFC title games in 4 of the other years, you realize that in 9 years, the Dallas Cowboys could have won a Super Bowl.
It's just crazy. And it's funny because those years that the Cowboys didn't make the Super Bowl, they probably would have beaten the AFC champions that season.
And so what we're going to do today is you're watching the film playing. We're just going to talk 78 to 85. We're just going to we're not going to go long on every year, but we'll start off with, which I still think maybe is not all your best team in your franchise history is not always the one that wins the Super Bowl. Because as great as 77 was, 78 was pretty darn good. But they ran into the buzzsaw, the Pittsburgh Steelers. So here we go. 78 to 85, an era that by all other accounts for an NFL franchise was very successful. And for Dallas, it feels like there was a lot left on the table.
Oh, for sure. I mean, if you look at it, there's a gap between the 77 Super Bowl and the 92 Super Bowl. These years 78 to 82, you can even extend it to 83. They should have won at least 2 Super Bowls during this time period. There was a lot of times where they made it to the conference championship game. Yep. As we'll talk about in 81, where it was a lucky tackle at the very end that stopped the Cowboys from even making it to the Super Bowl, and they would have probably beaten the Bengals that season. The very next season against Washington, it was a strike-shortened season. Danny White got hurt. That could have been another season where they made it against a very uniquely constructed Miami Dolphins team with the Killer Bees, and it was just
David Woodley at quarterback from Shreveport, Louisiana.
Yeah. Rest in peace.
Yeah, he died of a kidney cancer.
That kind of gives credit to Don Shula and able to figure out how to recreate himself. Yeah, because he went from that's
a good point. Like he went from a running back, hard-nosed defense to Dan Marino, and they don't run the ball enough.
As much as talking about Jimmy Garoppolo in the 19 conference championship game against the Packers, and think about Bob Greasy and the 73 Super Bowl against the Vikings, the 72 Super Bowl against the Redskins, that they did not pass the ball that much. They had 3 running backs that could get you 1,000 yards. Yep. And Larry Zonka, Jim Kick,
Mercury Morris.
Yeah. So kudos to Shula the all-time winningest coach, assuming Bill Belichick doesn't do it in the next 3 years. Bill Belichick is on pace to break Don Shula's.
Oh, he will. I think he's, I still feel that him not quite getting the Tom Landry, he fell one season short of matching Tom Landry's longest consecutive winning streaks. I think this is one he really wants. I think that's literally what he's hanging on for. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. So if you watch the last video, the 1977 Cowboys, they win the Super Bowl. They basically come back with almost the complete team. There wasn't a lot of changes, and that's one reason why they were so good. And they start the year off with a resounding 38-0 win over a Baltimore team that still had Burt Jones in that group. But they ended up collapsing 5-11 that year. But what you saw with Dallas here, in my opinion, you saw and you saw this over the whole NFL. You saw the passing game finally catching up to the run game, and where like Roger Staubach threw for 3,100 yards that year, threw for 25 touchdowns, but also 16 interceptions. That was considered a great year. Dak Prescott, and I know you said, but he just threw 27 touchdowns and 19 interceptions, and everybody's talking about what's wrong with Dak Prescott. That's how different the era was back then. So to throw for 16 interceptions, that wasn't considered that big of a deal. But you still had the run game of Tony Dorsett, 1,300 yards, and then Robert Newhouse with 584 yards. And receiving-wise, that's where you really saw the growth of Tony Hill.
Yeah.
Drew Pearson was still on the top of his game, but he actually only had 700 yards compared to Tony Hill's 823 yards. And I will go ahead and say this right now. Tony Hill is one of those that I think should get a bigger look at a Hall of Fame. I don't think he's quite Hall of Fame. I think he's in the Hall of very, very good. But in an era where 1,000 yards was still unique, he had 3,000-yard seasons in his career. Yeah. He had 950 yards. He had 1,100 yards. I mean, as much as we talk about Drew Pearson, Tony Hill from the late 70s through 85 was the Cowboys' main attack.
Yeah, I mean, there was not just him. I mean, there was so many other different great players. Preston Pearson, when we talked about for the 77 Cowboys, Tony Dorsett, Robert Newhouse. If you want to go back to just receiving, you got Billy Joe Dupree, who's kind of forming, he's kind of getting his role as an elite tight end of the late 70s.
Bush Johnson.
Bush Johnson. Yeah, it's funny because we didn't really talk about him too much in the Super Bowl episode.
Butch?
Yeah.
Well, we talked about the touchdown.
Yeah, I remember some of the two other plays where he really fumbled the ball. Yeah. It could have led to disaster for the Cowboys. But, great player. It was just a well-constructed team. It was a product of all the great draft picks they had in the mid to late 70s. Well, 73, 76 specifically. It was just funny because as we go on through the early to mid 80s, we're going to realize they kind of did not do anything else after the 76 draft.
I mean,
and honestly, most of their great draft picks were undrafted free agents.
Well, and also the rules of the time, most of the guys they drafted were basically tied to Dallas unless Dallas wanted to move them. There was, Plan B didn't start till 88, and that was the first true free agency.
Oh, okay.
And so Randy, think about Randy White. If his contract would expire and he'd hit the open market back then.
Oh man.
Ed Too Tall Jones, which again, one of the things, Ed Too Tall Jones, one of my favorite players, and one of the things I didn't even realize until really studying this was how much Ed Too Tall Jones was actually still so dominant late in the Dallas Cowboys era of playoffs. He was still good in 85. He was still good in 86. Yeah. And so all these guys, like you said, they drafted them in 74, 75, 76. They start, and then Tony Dorsett in 77.
Yeah.
They start to mature in 81, 82. But then you remember the Bush Johnsons and the Hollywood Hendersons, who basically got either released or traded because they didn't fit the Landry mode.
Yeah.
And think about those. And for Hollywood Henderson, it was a lot of his fault. Bush Johnson talked a lot, and that was his problem. Hollywood Henderson, cocaine was his problem. Very famous. He's very famous about that. And he there for a while in the early 80s, he was a speaker. He's also won 2 lotteries. That's a real fact.
It is.
Hollywood Henderson won 2 Texas State lotteries.
Yeah.
That is just absolutely crazy. But you and I kind of brought it up in 78 show or the 77 show, but legitimately, Thomas Henderson was Lawrence Taylor before Lawrence Taylor. And that's not a knock on Lawrence Taylor, but that's just how good Thomas Henderson was. And if you don't believe me, go look at the highlights. He returned kicks.
Yeah.
I mean, a linebacker returned kicks. And so part of the problem, as we always talk about with Landry, is I don't think Landry knew what to do with him. Because think about this. If you're in the late 70s and you get Hollywood Henderson and you see his 4.40 at 6'2", 240 or whatever he was, I kind of think I'd have gone 3-4.
Yeah.
Think about Randy White as your nose tackle, Harvey Martin and Ed Tootal as your outside ends, and then you're putting Henderson on one side. He might have had 30 sacks. I mean, he was that good.
You know, Randy White might have been undersized for that position as nose tackle, but he would have been so disruptive.
Oh, yeah.
That would have been just as effective.
Oh, he would have destroyed those A-gaps. Like his quickness and his ability to get his shoulders sideways, which if you've ever played defensive line, that's all it is.
And it would have been just as simple as, okay, blitz left because we want Tootal to get single coverage. Or not be double team.
Yeah,
or go to the right so Harvey Martin couldn't be double team. It would have been very simple because 3 fantastic, all should be in the Hall of Fame. Only one is. Tootal and Harvey Martin should be in the Hall of Fame.
At least Harvey Martin. With Tootal, I still think maybe he's in the Hall of really, really good.
Well, I mean, with his longevity, I think he should eventually get in.
But definitely Harvey Martin. Harvey Martin should be in the Hall of Fame. Yeah. When you look at what he did over a time, 114 sacks in 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean,
he only had one bad year, was last year.
Yeah, and even then that was a lot. I mean, he played, but he wasn't getting to the quarterback, but he had bad knees. But I mean, he had at one point 20 sacks, which that didn't count. We'll talk about that here in a little bit as we go through the seasons. Yeah. But he led the league. I mean, for 3 years, 76 to 78, 14.5 sacks, 20 sacks, 14.5 sacks. In an era where we're talking where 2 of those 3 years were 14 games. Think about that, folks. He got 20 sacks in 14 games. Yeah. Give him 2 more games.
Honestly, I really think this is the best version of the Cowboys during the Landry era.
What, 78 or 77?
78.
I think 78 and even 79. And I know they lose in 79, and that gets, it's remembered as the Jack Youngblood playing on a broken leg game. Yeah. But I just, honestly, those 2 teams were better than the 77 team. Look, give the credit to the Steelers. The Steelers in 78 were just a better team, but we're talking about 2 teams that almost any other year in that era would have won the Super Bowl.
And credit to Chuck Noll for being more pass happy in 78 and 79. Yep. I think that's what got the Steelers their last 2 Super Bowls in the 70s. Bradshaw finally became the Hall of Famer that they drafted. In my opinion, he was more of a game manager up until then.
Oh yeah, you look at that Minnesota Super Bowl; he was terrible.
Yeah, what did they win? 16-9
or 16-6,
16-6,
something like that. Yeah,
I mean, it was Franco Harris. Like, I could hand the ball off to Franco Harris. Like, he wasn't really the reason why they won, but he was the starting quarterback of a team that won 4 Super Bowls in 1 decade. So of course he's going to be in the Hall of Fame. And I get that. But to me, what makes him the Hall of Famer is these last few years with the Steelers, starting with 78.
I want to talk about 78 because you want to talk about, you and I talk about there's transition years and there's these years that just stand out. Listen to this. In 78, in the AFC, you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 teams finish 500 or better.
That's amazing.
In the NFC, you had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 teams. So 17 teams finished 8-8 or better.
Wow.
That is
and this is the first season that the
16-game schedule. Yeah. I mean, you saw there was only a few teams that you would go, those are outs. Cincinnati was pretty weak at 4. But I'll contend Buffalo Bills at 5-11. You go look at their 5-11. That's Chuck Knox. That was at the end of Chuck Knox's reign. But you go look at their losses: 21-20, 31-28, 28-14, 5-0. I mean, you're talking 3 games, and you're all of a sudden flipping them to 8-8, and they're in the playoffs, and they were a 5-11 team. This was an era. Certain eras are remembered because we wax nostalgic about our youth. Yeah. But if you just look at this era, 77-80 might be some of the best NFL football that there was going at the time, because everybody was competitive. Even the bad teams were at least competitive.
Yeah.
And you had teams like Washington with a winning record staying at home, Green Bay with a winning record staying at home, Seattle, Oakland, and San Diego, all three with winning records, all three staying at home. And then you have teams like the Cowboys at 12-4 and the Steelers at 14-2, and they're the ones that.
And good job on the sort of expansion. Seahawks and Saints. That's this season. This is their third year in existence, and the Saints finished 7-9. Oh no, wait, Saints have been in the league for a while.
Yeah,
Seattle was with Tampa. Tampa actually had a pretty good year this year. Well, they're 5-11 for them. Yeah,
yeah.
But yeah, the Seahawks, they were an expansion team of 76, and they ended up being 9-7 by year 3 with one of the UFA players from the Cowboys in 75, Jim Zorn.
Yep, Jim Zorn and Steve Largent. And you know, you talk about those Buccaneers. People forget about them in the late 70s, early 80s. They were a playoff perennial team.
Yeah, they won a couple of division titles.
Had the Selman brothers, had Doug Williams at quarterback.
Yeah.
But their issue was, again, is they just never could get an offense whenever they played the teams like the Cowboys and stuff, who would have just enough offense to beat them in the playoffs.
And think about Doug Williams' completion percentage during this time period. It was like, it was definitely in the 40s.
Oh, yeah. They were terrible, but they had such a great defense.
Yeah.
So the 78 Cowboys, they on the year, they go 12-4, as we talked about. They get into the playoffs, and lo and behold, they have a new playoff team. This started Atlanta. A lot of people forget that there for a 3-year run, Atlanta and Dallas had a really good rivalry, and Atlanta gave them everything. We'll talk more about the 80 game. That's the one that everybody remembers. Yeah. But even in this game, it was 27-20. Dallas scored a touchdown in the third and fourth. They kept Atlanta scoreless in the second half, and they won. But, I mean, going into half, it was 20-13 Atlanta. And again, there's so many players that we can talk about throughout the history of this. Lynn Dickey for the Packers, but Steve Bartkowski, underrated quarterback. Yeah. Underrated quarterback on his career. He ended up throwing for 24,000 yards, 156 touchdowns, 144 interceptions. Again, that was in a time that's a good interception quality. He was Rookie of the Year. He finished in the MVP voting twice. He made two Pro Bowls. But hey, if they hold on and beat Dallas in 80, that was a really good Atlanta team. I think Atlanta could have been a team that, if they could have beat Dallas, could have played in a Super Bowl. And that's what. Again, I go back to this era. There's just so many good football teams. I think that's why it's so fun to go back and watch these team highlights, because I was watching the Cowboy highlights for what we were doing, and I'd end up on the Atlanta highlights and be like, damn, man, that Grits Blitz, Jerry Glanville. Before we even knew who Jerry Glanville was, he was the guy that was running those defenses for them.
Yeah, and with the fast forwarding into the future, 1980, I really think with that Atlanta defense, they would have stopped Wilbert Montgomery and the Eagles on offense, because the Grits Blitz defense was pretty good at that. And I really feel that they would have beaten the Eagles in the NFC title game. And
that was an emotional game. Like that was so the one thread about the 3 straight NFC title losses, Dallas could never get home field advantage. Yeah. They would lose that 1 or 2 games that they shouldn't have. And that's why, I mean, you put the Dallas Eagle game in Dallas, I think Dallas wins.
Well, we'll talk about the 80 season, but Dallas and Philadelphia played in the season finale that year. Yes. And there was a scenario where Dallas could have had the division title in the 2 seed, but it was extreme circumstances. They actually accomplished it during the game, but then the Eagles scored enough points.
Yeah, they just it was a point differential. Yeah. And Dallas jumped out to a big lead, and then Eagles literally were just playing the score. Yeah. In fact, I think at one point they literally kind of just gave the ball right back to Dallas, like, go score so we can score again, because it was time. It was more. It was more advantageous for them to let Dallas score, get the ball back and score. Again, but that's the difference in winning into the Super and going to the Super Bowl. You've got to win those games. Yeah. And that's where, for all the talk about 65-70 next year's champions, really 78-85. More importantly, 78-83. Yeah. Dallas was next year's champions. They just couldn't win the game when it mattered. But you take each one of those title games, And inside the game, oh, I see why the Eagles win. Oh, I see why Washington win. Oh, I see why San Francisco win. So Dallas doesn't get really knocked for it. You just feel like the other team just had better moments in those games.
Yeah, I mean, they really did. I mean, in the 80 with Philadelphia, it was just one player, Will Montgomery. 81, it was basically back and forth, tight contest. It was just one play decided everything. Yep. And then 82 was an injury. So it wasn't like the Cowboys were just overmatched, outplayed. It was a situation where Dallas just had an unfortunate situation happen.
Yep.
So they were there. They were knocking on the door.
Well, you look at 79. Dallas finishes 11-5. But
number one seed.
But
Staubach's last year.
Yeah, Staubach's last year. But they get the Rams at home, a Rams team that on the year was 9-7. They were on like their second string quarterback because Pat Hayden had started the first 10 games and he struggled.
Yeah.
Vince Ferragamo and Jeff Rutledge. I forgot Jeff Rutledge. Remember him? He was a Giant backup for a while.
Yeah.
But Vince Ferragamo steps in and they have a magical run because of their defense. That they hold Dallas to 19 points. They shut out Tampa Bay. And then in that game against the Steelers, it's close early. But as my dad said, he goes, I never felt the Steelers were going to lose that game. It was just the Rams defensively was good about mucking things up. But once the Steelers kind of figured them out, they took off. And that's exactly what happened. The Rams were up 13-10. And then Lynn Swann, 47-yard pass.
Yeah,
I didn't know Matt Barr kicked for the Steelers.
Yeah, that was the rookie year.
I always think of him as the Giants and all, but I never.
It was 70 or 79 was the rookie year.
But it was a 47-yard pass to Lynn Swann, and then the Rams answered back with a 24-yard pass. But then John Stallworth, the famous 73-yard pass, one of the prettiest passes. Like you can knock Bradshaw all you want, but that pass he literally drops it right on the shoulder of Stallworth, and then the Steelers finish it off later on in that fourth quarter with a touchdown that sealed the deal. I would have liked to have seen Dallas in that Super Bowl. I think Dallas had not figured out the Steelers, but they were, I mean, it's not like the two losses. They were both by 4 points.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the Steelers were, head and shoulders. It wasn't like the Steelers, like the Broncos and the Niners in the 88 Super Bowl. Like this was two really good teams that the Steelers just made two more plays in that game. And I don't think in the 79, I think just the odds of how football is, I think Cowboys would have won that. But anyway, So that was the 79 season. Then we go to the 80 season. And this is when Roger Staubach surprisingly retired at the end of the 79 season.
Yeah.
Before we even thought about it, concussions basically ended it.
Yeah.
He basically was like, I have a career now as a real estate guy. He was already making millions doing that. And wisely, he said, okay, I'm going to go ahead and quit 2 years early while I can still think. And he became a billionaire. He's the richest former pro athlete in the history of doing it outside of sports. Like, Michael Jordan, I think, is almost a billionaire now, but that was all because of, Nike and Air Jordan, all the things he did inside sports. Roger Staubach built a real estate empire that he sold for like $10 billion in the late 90s. He made the right decision for him. Might be a little selfish for us fans. No, but Danny White stepped right in. And you could make the case that the 1980 Danny White was probably the best quarterback season that the Cowboys had because Dallas and the NFL was fully into pass mode. They threw for 3,100 yards. Danny White had 28 touchdowns, 3,200 yards, but he also had 25 interceptions. And that kind of became the undoing for Danny White. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. But, Danny White won 62 games and lost 30. That's freaking amazing.
Yeah.
He threw for 155 touchdowns, but he threw for 132 interceptions. And even then, his interception years, 83 where he threw for 23, against 80 where he threw for 25, 85 where he threw for 17, that always held him back. He had a propensity of throwing the bad pass at the wrong time. And that kind of became that whole Cowboy thing where Danny White couldn't win the big one. And I think there's some valid points of that because, man, those teams around him are damn good. Like, we're talking Randy White in his prime, Tony Dorsett in his prime, Ed Too Tall Jones in his. I mean, the Cowboys were in their prime.
Yeah, all those great mid-70s draft picks were all in their
Yep.
prime. So I mean, this is the reason why the Cowboys made the conference championship those first 3 years in the 80s. But like, yeah, like we were talking about in the 1980, they couldn't stop one player on the Eagles. But if you look back as well, they had a lot of losses in 1980
for them. 11-5
outside of Roger Staubach retiring.
Oh, you're talking about losses on the roster?
Losses on the roster.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So yeah, in 1980, there was no Roger Staubach. There was no Cliff Harris. He retired. Hollywood Henderson got cut for just him being him, just being
cocaine,
erratic behavior, his erratic play. Yeah, he was cut before the 79 season ended. I would say that's part of the reason why they didn't even make it past the divisional round in 79, even though they had the number 1 seed.
Yeah, no, you're right.
He ended up going to the 49ers. He really didn't do much after that. But,
no.
Rayfield Wright was gone. He went to the Eagles. Then retired before the season even started, so he really didn't play.
Yeah, he didn't play.
Yeah. Aaron Kyle went to the Denver Broncos. So they lost a lot of key players. And as we keep going through each year of the Cowboys in the 80s, you'll start realizing, oh, they just keep losing all these great draft picks.
And they weren't filling in with this,
Yeah, because they just stopped drafting well after 76. They really their undrafted free agents were better than who they actually did draft. And I think in next year, in the 1981, you'll start realizing, oh, that was an all-time terrible draft.
Well, so looking
one
at
of these years was.
Well, I was trying to pull that up. Okay, so in the 80s, in 1980.
Yeah, okay.
This was their draft. I think I can do this every year. I didn't realize I could do this. So their draft was in the first round, Bill Rowe.
Okay.
James Jones. I remember James Jones running back, but he wasn't really great. Gary Hogaboom. He would become a big story.
Yeah.
Timmy Newsome. Really good solid running back.
Yeah.
What they used him for. Lester Brown didn't even play. Larry Savage didn't play. Jackie Flowers didn't play. Matthew Teague didn't play. Gary Padgett. I don't even know who these guys are. Norm Wells. I mean, these are guys that just didn't do anything. Yeah. And that's 1980. That's right in the middle when you still think of Dallas as being Dallas. Yeah. Here we go in 79. Robert Shaw, Aaron Mitchell, Doug Cosby. Remember him?
Right.
Bob Huckhill. I don't even never heard of that dude.
Okay.
Curtis Anderson, Ron Springs, really solid.
Right, yeah, solid.
But again, nobody else is big. So in 1978 draft choice, you go Larry Bethea. He was solid, really good. Played till 83. Todd Christensen, their second round pick for whatever reason, didn't even make the team. And it's one of those. Okay, so why did you draft him in the second round? Like that makes no sense. Now they did again. You go back to their late drafts. They did in the 11th round pull out Dennis Thurman, who would become a very famous part. Thurman's Thieves. Yeah. We'll talk about them here in a minute. But yeah, you're exactly right. It's real easy to see why the Cowboys slowly crumbled. It's their draft picks. 1981, Howard Richards, Doug Donnelly, Glenn Titzer, Scott Pallure, Gary Nelson, Danny Spradlin, Ron Fellows. You're right. Everybody that the guys that made impacts really the late draft picks.
Honestly, going back to 1980, they just kind of got lucky. It was like a part-time player like Aaron Mitchell and Steve Wilson. They kind of helped offset Aaron Kyle leaving and Benny Barnes retiring with interceptions. I mean, because the 79 team, they were the number 1 seed. They're 11-5.
Yeah.
But it wasn't really a great team. But what made the 80 team good, not great, was the interceptions, like the turnovers, which is something that we would start seeing as we went into the 80s.
The great coaching of Tom Landry.
The great coaching of Tom Landry. And when you started finally watching football live, you started knowing the Thurman Thieves. This kind of started that with the fact that in 79, they only had 13 interceptions, but in 1980, they ended up having 27 interceptions. So they just a little over doubled their interception total.
But they also started giving up bigger plays. The Dallas, and I even said this to you before we start recording, going back and truly, really watching all these films back to back to back, I forgot how much Dallas in the early 80s relied on the blitz.
Yeah.
Like they lived and died by the blitz.
Well, because they still had the strong defense up
Yes.
front.
And they still had a good offense.
Randy White, Harvey Martin.
At Too Tall. Larry Bethea.
Yeah. So they still had that. So they could still blitz and create turnovers. But, I mean, there was, as we get to the mid 80s, you can see there's a cap on that style of play.
There really is. And that's actually what hurt the 80. We talk about why didn't the 85 Bears win more Super Bowls?
Yeah.
Because the 46 defense was figured out. If you could just block it up enough, you gave big plays on the backside. And that's what Dallas did in the early 80s. Their defense was, and that's why I've said this before, but the Everson Walls, like if Everson Walls makes the Hall of Fame, I'm fine with that. But I understand the idea of why he didn't, even though he had a lot of interceptions. He also gave up a lot of big plays. That literally Thurman Steves, that's what they did. I will bring up, you talk about a guy who was undrafted, who probably had a bigger career than people realize. And I sent this to you the other day. Is Michael Downs. Michael Downs became the epitome of the blitzing safety. Between 82 and 84, like that's what he did. Yeah. He blitzed and blitzed and blitzed. And again, that's what we talk about with Dallas in those early 80s. At that point, I think Tom Landry realized, like, we can't just play everybody in front of us. We're not good enough. We've got to attack. And it led to great stats. It led to great seasons. Michael Downs as a safety in 83 had 111 tackles, 4 interceptions. In 84, he had 136 tackles, 7 interceptions, 4 sacks, 13 passes defended, 3 forced fumbles, and he was an all-pro.
Yeah.
But he also gave up big plays because they were playing a feast or famine defense. And it's one of those where you give credit to Tom Landry for that, but then you also go back to the depth wasn't there. So if Randy White was banged up or if he missed a game, the difference between Randy White and who was backing him up was night and day. And that's where a long season, and that's where teams get wore down and things. And it's crazy because, as I said to you before we started recording this, and I said at the beginning of the show, any other franchise outside of maybe San Francisco, Pittsburgh, and New England, but even then, New England's new as far as this. You give them the 78 to 85, and they'd be like, "Oh man, we love this. We make the playoffs every year but one. We make 3 conference title games." But for Dallas, it legitimately feels like things were left on the table, especially. And let's go ahead and get into it. You talk about the Wilmer Montgomery game. So 1980, Dallas and Philadelphia. Dick Vermeil had brought Philadelphia to the cusp of being great. They're not quite like the Cinderella team that like Denver was in 77. The Eagles had built up. Dick Vermeil came in. They were, his first year, they were 5-9. Then in 78, they were 9-7. And then, and some people will say that their better team was that 79 Eagles that lost to Tampa Bay in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, them and Dallas had the best record in the NFC that season.
Yes. And then that 80 team, it all comes together for them, at least as far as Dallas. Again, Dallas is still great. Dallas is 12-4 that year, but that begins if Dallas just wins one more game. Yeah. One more game, that game's in Dallas. And I can remember, and this is very young, but I went back and watched that highlight of that game, and it's the same. The fandoms in Philadelphia in 80 and Washington in 82, the fans won those games. Yeah. And I'm not knocking San Francisco, but San Francisco was never quite that crazy. But Philadelphia in 80 and Washington in 82, the stands are shaking. Like and especially in that Philadelphia game, it's cold, it's blustery. It's that type of game I always hate when Dallas has to go to Philadelphia because everything looks raw and it just looks like Dallas can't do anything. And that's what happened in that game. Wilmer Montgomery had a great game, but what really won that game for them is the defense. They held Dallas to 7 points in that game. And this is still the great Dallas team, and they held Danny White to 31 attempts for 127 yards. Drew Pearson, 15 yards. That's it. 15 yards for Drew Pearson, a Hall of Fame player. Yeah. Running wise, they held Tony Dorsett to 13 carries to 41 yards. In saying all that, it still took in the third quarter, the Eagles scored 3 times or 2. Right. That's a different game.
And if Dallas won that game, they would have played the Oakland Raiders.
They had a great game. That game between,
Yeah.
I remember this game. And I don't know why I remember this game, but I just remember this game where the Chargers kept coming back. And every time the Chargers would score, then the Raiders would either kick a field goal or score themselves. And I remember because of Chuck Muncie, of all people. Chuck Muncie was basically in the last parts of him being great. He had 81, he had 1,000 yards.
Yeah.
But 79 and 80 was his great years.
Yeah.
He played for the played for the Saints. God, that's just terrible.
That was a good Saints team in 79.
Yeah, they weren't bad, but
they almost finally broke through.
Yeah, 7 and 9 that year. Dick Nolan. Hey, you remember that time we wanted Dick Nolan Jr. as our defensive coordinator for Dallas?
Yeah, I remember when you wanted Dick Nolan Jr.
You did too. We all liked him. We thought
you just projected that onto me.
I'll project a lot of things on you, son. What? But yeah, so
they almost won the division in 79.
Well, again, that was one of those years where the West was kind of reconfiguring.
Yeah, it was the Rams who won that division, the one that ended up making the Super Bowl, like you mentioned earlier. So yeah, the Saints almost actually won the division. They could have done some damage, really. But
again, we're talking about how didn't Dallas win?
But the very next season, the Saints went 1-15, but they lost Muncie, so that was a big contributing factor.
What are your thoughts off the? This is really just completely going off the topic. Archie Manning,
great quarterback.
Do you really think he was great? I don't know.
I don't know. The Steelers, put him on the Cowboys, see what he does. What do you think he does? I don't think he has to improvise like he did with the Saints. The Saints really didn't have anybody. And
I'm not trying to act like he didn't, but I just kind of wonder if that's one of those things where people they look back and it become, because you look at him over his year, 18 touchdowns, 21 interceptions, 15 touchdowns, 20 interceptions. His best year was 23 touchdowns, 20 interceptions, which oddly enough came in that 1-15 year. Huh. So I don't know. I feel like he could. I'm not saying he would have been great if you put him on a good team, but I kind of feel like people over exaggerate how good he really was.
No, I mean, I think he was a great player. I just really feel that he was not on teams that were great.
All right.
Especially with the Saints, they really didn't get great until the late 80s.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in the 86 to 91 because the Saints
Dome Patrol,
Saints left some titles on the table.
Oh, for sure.
If they did, I don't know. I guess this is my issue when you look at, and I know they don't try.
Yeah.
I know they don't try to be bad, but when you look at like Tampa Bay in the late 70s, the best defense in the league. Between 78, this whole time, 78 to 84, the Selman brothers, Tampa Bay, just get an offense. Get an offense and you win. At least you go to a Super Bowl.
Or get a quarterback that can throw over 50%.
Well, I don't even know if it's Doug Williams' fault. I think again, you're living in that era where you still had teams that felt like, hey, we're going to win every game 13-3 or whatever, you know. But all right, so we talked 80, so let's now go to 81. This is when I can say I remember games. I remember watching these games.
And this is when so remember I told you in 79 they only had 13 interceptions.
Yes.
In 1980 they had 27. So in 81 they had 37 interceptions, but led by a rookie Emerson Walls with 11.
And again, we talk about Tom Landry, the innovator. He created the 4-3. He then created the offense to beat the 4-3, and he created a 4-3 blitz. He wasn't the first that created the blitz. The 3-4 had already started. You already had the early shades of the zone blitz that would then show back up in the late 90s. But he started blitzing with a 4-3, sending Michael down, sending the safeties. Yeah. And then you had Tony Dorsett at his apex, 1,600 yards. But here's the crazy thing. 1,600 yards, 4 touchdowns. Because what you did back then is, you want to talk about vulturing. Ron Springs. Okay, so Tony Dorsett had 342 carries and 4 touchdowns. Okay. Ron Springs had 172 carries and 10 touchdowns.
Wow. 1
out of every 7 basically snaps, Ron Springs was falling into the end zone.
We'll talk about a vulture in another podcast.
Oh yeah, that'll be actually that's coming up here soon.
Yeah.
But then you look at receiving wise. This to me is when you had Tony Hill at 953 yards. Yeah. You were starting to see him replace Drew Pearson. Drew Pearson had only 1,600 yards.
Yeah.
I say only. Butch Johnson, this was Butch Johnson's best year, 552 yards. But then you still had Ron Springs with 350, Tony Dorsett with 325. A young Doug Cosby, who didn't even start a game, had 225 because you still had Billy Joe Dupree and Jay Salati.
Yeah.
I mean, I think of the three teams that lost in the NFC title game, this is by far the best team.
And Gina Carano's father is playing for the Cowboys.
That's right, Glenn Carano, backup quarterback. This was the best non-Super Bowl team for the Cowboys in this era. This 81 team was really, really good. When you look at let's go ahead and go look at the whole season for the whole league. You had Dallas, of course, winning the NFC East at 12-4, Philadelphia at 10-6, New York at 9-7, Washington at 8-8, and St. Louis at 7-9. So for all the talk about last year's great NFC East run, then throw in a really good St. Louis team that was, if you put them in any other division, they probably win 10 games.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was definitely a great year for the NFC.
You had Tampa Bay 9-7, Detroit 8-8, Green Bay 8-8, Minnesota 7-9, and even Chicago 6-10. No team was great, but the NFC Central was no slouch. Like, you had to go in and earn your games.
Yeah.
And then you had the West. That was kind of the weak one. San Francisco 13-3, Atlanta 7-9, the Rams 6-10, and then the Saints. And over in the AFC East, this was a magical year for the AFC East. The Dolphins, the Jets, the Bills, all just absolutely amazing seasons. Yeah. Miami 11-4-1, New York 10-5-1 because they tied each other. Yeah. Buffalo 10-6. Then in the Central, Cincinnati 12-4, Pittsburgh 8-7. You started seeing Houston. Earl Campbell was hurt in 81 a lot. You started seeing them kind of starting to collapse. And then in the West, you had San Diego 10-6, Denver 10-6, Kansas City 9-7, Oakland 7-9. They took a big step back in between their two Super Bowl wins. Yeah. And that's what I think. That's one of the main reasons why you don't get Jim Plunkett as was thought of as a Hall of Fame quarterback, because when they were great, they were great, but then they were also bad at times.
Well, I mean, Jim Plunkett was also #1 draft pick. Kind of
he struggled with the Patriots.
Wasted his first 8 years. Kind of caught on with the Raiders. Won 2 Super Bowls. Kind of Tom Flores. But I think Tom Flores just got in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
So good for him. Yeah, finally.
All right. So the Super Bowl champs are the Niners. They played the Bengals. The MVP of the year was Ken Anderson. George Rogers was Rookie of the Year. Boy, he collapsed quick. Lawrence Taylor was Defensive Rookie of the Year. Lawrence Taylor was also Defensive Player of the Year. Dan Fouts led the league in passing, 4,800 yards. George Rogers led the league in rushing, 1,600 yards. Yeah. Alfred Jenkins led the league in 1,300 yards. A very underrated Falcon wide receiver who was a big play threat, and 81 was his best year, and then he battled injuries. Right when you thought he was in the prime of his career in 82 and 83, he was hurt, and then he was out of the league. But let's go that 81. I think everybody, when they think of the Cowboys of the early 80s, it's the catch.
Yeah.
Joe Montana to Dwight Clark. Yeah. But as you and I have said over and over, and most Cowboy fans, that's not the play. The play is on the very next drive.
Correct.
Danny White hits Drew Pearson over the middle, and Drew Pearson's about to score. Or at least, if nothing else, get into field goal position.
Yep.
And Ronnie Lott, being the Hall of Fame player as he is, grabs Drew Pearson, and even as Ronnie Lott has basically said, by the fingernail, and pulls him back and is able to bring him down. And then, like 2 plays later, Danny White fumbles when he gets hit. That right there. Now, it might change how the Cowboys are in the early 90s, because I think if Landry wins one more Super Bowl, he gets longer time at the end of the year, all things work out. Yeah. But in saying that, there is nothing in my mind that makes me think that the Cincinnati Bengals would have beat Dallas in that Super Bowl.
Yeah, it was a team that was just like with the 49ers in 81. They were fresh meat, baby faces. They were just...
Forrest Gregg was their head coach.
Forrest Gregg was
Cincinnati legitimately came out of nowhere as far as making the Super Bowl. They had been contending. We talked about it before. Bill Walsh should have been the head coach before Forrest Gregg, but they decided to go with a offensive line coach in 70. I think it was 78, and they were terrible. And so in 79 they were 4-11, in 80 they were 5-7, and then in 81 they have the big year and they go 12-4 and make the playoffs. And Cincinnati through the 80s were really solid.
Yeah.
And give them credit. They did it with 2 regimes. Forrest Gregg, Ken Anderson in that group. And then in the next Super Bowl, a great Super Bowl again with San Francisco, it was Boomer Esiason.
And Weiss.
Huh?
Sam Weiss.
Yeah, Sam Weiss is the head coach. And what's his name? Yeah, Icky Woods is the running back. Yeah. And that whole group, that was a great team.
Arguably the greatest offensive lineman of all time, Anthony Munoz.
Yes, and Tim Crummery, who broke his leg famously in that Super Bowl. Great defensive tackle.
He was one of the best interior
and that
linemen.
changed that game.
Yeah.
That completely changed that game because Roger Craig started having more space. And that was the first. So when Lawrence Taylor broke Joe Theismann's leg, like you could see it, but it wasn't like 100%. Like if you blinked, you missed it.
Yeah.
Tim Crummery, so when his leg gets broken a weird way, he's using his legs to push off the tackle, and his ankle just snaps. And his ankle in slow motion, and NBC kept showing that replay. And his legs, I'm like, I didn't know your foot could touch your knee. Little did I know, like 7 years later, my foot would touch my knee in a bad. But yeah, so I mean, they just kept playing it over and over. But yeah, I feel of the 3, that was the one that was Dallas's best chance in an NFC title game. And again, they couldn't quite win the games when it mattered in season. Kind of like what Dallas has done over the playoffs for the last 10, 15 years. They make the playoffs, but they always end up on the road, it seems like. Except for 2016 and 2021. We won't talk about those. But they do. They, like, you look at 2009, that was a really good team, and they have to go to Minnesota on the road. Because they win one game, and it completely changes everything.
Yeah.
So anyway, 81, they would do it, and then 82 comes, and then that's the strike. And I didn't know anything. I don't remember anything about the 82 strike. I just remember that there was a strike and like there was no football. But I was 7. I went and played G.I. Joe and I was fine. But what is funny is that's also the only year, and I will go ahead and say on record, this will be the only year that a kicker will win MVP.
Yes.
As Matt Mosley wins it for, I don't even know why. I mean, I know he was good, but 82 is really weird because so the 87 strike, they replace it with players, and we'll talk about that in next month's episode. 82, they just stopped, and then they just continued. Yeah. Like there was no it's a weird stat year, it's a weird record year.
Yeah.
I just remember like it was just weird.
Well, I mean, everything was weird because it wasn't division based anymore. It was 2 conferences, 1 whole division.
That's right. Everybody went by seeding. Old school, like NBA seeding.
Top 8 teams made the playoffs. So it was a huge playoff tournament.
Which was kind of fun. I do remember
it was kind of fun. And then going 82, they were without the Dallas Cowboys were out D.D. Lewis, who retired.
Yeah, he finally retired.
And so did free safety Charlie Waters. He also retired. The strike year lasted from week 3 to week 10. So NFL teams played 2 weeks, then they had the strike for about 7, and then they came back after week 10, week 11. So what happened was there was a 16-team tournament, 8 teams on each side. The conference record was ignored. It's just your record. It doesn't matter what conference you're in, because normally you would be seeded based off if you won the division.
Yep.
But in this case, it's just top record in each conference.
Yeah, it was a play-in tournament, which is kind of cool if you think about it.
Yeah,
I think they did the best that they could in that situation. I think that was better than playing the scrubs like they did in 87.
A little stats for those that cared about it. Dallas went on a winning streak where they always won their opening game of the season.
17 years in a row or something like that.
And it got broken this year when Dallas lost to Pittsburgh.
Yep.
Who was kind of on the decline in the 80s.
Yeah, 83 was their decline year. That was the year that Pittsburgh finally.
And that was last year of Terry Bradshaw.
Yep.
He retired after 83. And then 84, luckily, they made it to the AFC title game. They lost to the Dolphins.
That was Mark Malone.
Yeah, Mark Malone.
Lewis Lips.
Yeah, it was a Cinderella run.
Well, that began a weird era for the AFC where Cinderella teams, again, Pittsburgh again in 95, but even more in between Denver.
Think about the next year, the New England Patriots.
The New England Patriots in 86. You look at 85 season, 86 Super Bowl.
Yeah.
As much as the drive, the two back-to-back years for Denver, as great as that is, Cleveland was better fit to play San Francisco and the Giants. In 86
I think Cleveland would have won one Super Bowl during that time period.
Exactly. And so, again, that's why, the AFC had their stretch in the 70s where they kept winning other than Dallas.
Yeah.
Same thing in the 80s. It was the NFC
because
the best AFC team didn't always make the Super Bowl.
So this was the year that the Cowboys, they started 6-1 after the strike, and they lost the final 2 games. One of the losses was to the Vikings.
Yep.
That was that famous Monday night game where Tony Dorsett had the NFL record for the longest
99 yards.
Yeah, longest touchdown run. But it was on prime time, so everybody got to see it.
Yep. Everybody forgets that's a game they actually lost, 31-27.
And Dallas never trailed at halftime of any game this shortened season.
Yep. And then they get into the playoffs.
Yes, but before that, one more thing. Tex Schramm and Gil Brandt proposed to the NFL competition committee, what would later become the NFL scouting combine.
Yes, which is basically what Dallas had been doing for 20 years.
Yeah.
And I get what Tex Schramm was doing, but at the end of the day, that hastened the demise for the Cowboys. Because you listen to again, the greats of that time, Bill Parcells, they literally say that first combine, they just all looked at what the Cowboys were doing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what they do. That's what they do. And so I get the idea. It's kind of like Jerry Jones and the salary cap. I get why you're doing it, but you basically ended your own dynasty because you allowed other teams to catch up.
Correct.
So they get into the playoffs in 81 or 82. They beat Tampa Bay 30-17. They beat Green Bay 37-26. And then they get into Washington. And this is, so for people that don't know, I grew up in a weird household. I grew up in a household where my dad is a Dallas Cowboy fan, Red Dead, and my mom is a Washington fan, Red Dead. And this was the climax.
Red Dead?
That's just what you say when it's like dead on. This was the climax of that. And so 2 things that I remember from this game is Danny White got hurt, but Dallas did make a comeback in the second half. A lot of people forget about that. They always remember, Danny White got hurt. It was 14-3 at half, and Dallas had actually made it 21-17. Then on a third down, I think it was 3rd and 6. I'm going just straight off memory. Joe Theismann's about to get sacked, and he dumps it off to Charlie Brown, who literally fights for a first down. They get a field goal. They make it 24-17, and then Dallas could never get back. It's one of those, if they stop them there, even in Washington, you've got momentum. You've scored 14 consecutive points. You've stopped them. Boom, you can make it. But Washington was the better team. I don't even know if Danny White, if he gets to play the whole game. He was 9 of 15 for 113, so he did start well. But again, the one thing I've realized looking at all these playoff losses, and I'm not saying Tony Dorsett didn't show up, but usually the run game is what struggled. Tony Dorsett, 57 carries on 57 yards on 15 carries. Dallas struggled against the Eagles, the Niners, and the Redskins. We can still call them the Redskins because the Redskins at the time. They struggled on the run, and that's where the bread and butter of Dallas was. But this also marked the end of Drew Pearson. So people don't realize that Drew Pearson didn't just retire. Drew Pearson in 1983 was in a car wreck, and his brother was killed. Okay. It was on Dallas. It was on the Dallas freeway. I don't remember where it was at, but he could never. He just never was the same. And the sad thing is Drew Pearson fell asleep, and he had the crash. It killed his brother, and he was 33, which at that time was, I mean, even now, but especially then, 33 was old in the NFL. And he never played again. And that's why it took him so long to get into the Hall of Fame. He was starting to decline, but he didn't have those 2 or 3 extra years of 500 yards and 5 touchdowns. That would have just added to his stuff. And so that was the end of an era. And that even though you still had Dorsett, you still had Tony Hill, and you still had Ed Too Tall Jones and Hart, you had a lot of the players.
Yeah.
Not having Roger Staubach, not having Drew Pearson, that just kind of felt like that was the end, and that really was, because then they never made it to another NFC title game until 1992. And it's funny because, again, it's not like the 83 Cowboys were terrible. I mean, these were still solid teams, but they just, you kind of realize they were running on, if everybody was healthy, they were fine. But if they needed to, again, go into that depth, they struggled. Now, I have affinity for the 83 team because I actually got to see them. This is
really,
yeah. Yeah, I've showed you that before. I got to see them on Thanksgiving Day against the St. Louis Cardinals. I also got to see them at the beginning of the year in September against the New Orleans Saints. Now, the 83 Cowboys always got behind. They always gave up a score, and then they would come back, and they did it in both of those games. The St. Louis one
sounds familiar.
How so?
Current Cowboys.
Oh, yeah, I guess so. I didn't think about that. But yeah, so I barely remember the Saints game. I know Dallas won like 21-20. They came back late.
Okay.
I remember the St. Louis game because it was Thanksgiving, and Dallas was down 7-0 when Roy Hill had like a 70-yard touchdown, and then Dallas just absolutely destroyed them. And that was also, I was at that age where, I started, like, I remember games. I remember things that were happening. It's not just little moments. I can remember almost every Cowboy game of that.
Yeah.
And then we go to the 84 season. Now, this is a season where the Cowboys, by all accounts, had a good season. They were 9-7, but this was the year that every loss just absolutely destroyed them. And the reason why is they lost to the Giants. They lost to the Cardinals. They lost to the Redskins. They lost to the Giants. But more importantly, my dad still remembers this. They lost to the terrible Buffalo Bills. And that's the game.
Were they winless at this point?
Yes, they ended up 2-14. Their first win was against Dallas. The very first play was like let me look it up to make sure. I want to make sure I'm right. It's like a 60-yard touchdown. 85-yard touchdown. I'm sorry.
Wow.
The very first play was a Greg Bell 85-yard touchdown.
Who was good.
Yeah, no. I mean, he was a good running back.
He had 2 touchdowns in this game.
Yeah, he had 206 yards.
The great Harry Hugboom.
Yes.
Hugboom.
Well, and this is where, so this is part 2 of where Tom Landry struggled as a coach. He couldn't decide on quarterbacks. That was shown with Roger Staubach and Craig Mortensen. And then once Danny White started getting hurt, he always thought Gary Hogeboom was the next one, and then eventually it morphed into Steve Plur.
Yeah.
By the way, Gary Hogeboom was on Survivor.
So going back, I'm going to go back to 83.
Okay, go ahead.
Before you go into 84. So, one good draft pick the Cowboys had in the 80s was Jim Jeffcoat.
Oh, yes. Yes.
That happened in 83. And honestly, the Cowboys started 12-2. In 83. Like, they were on their way. It was just the one game at home versus Washington to decide the number 1 seed, to decide, who would make the playoffs as the 1 seed in the NFC.
Yep.
They lost by 3 touchdowns.
But Washington was really good too.
Well, that was Washington's best year.
Yeah, that was the Washington of Joe Theismann and John Riggins, and 4th and 1 against the Dolphins in the Super Bowl.
Yeah, but now your new Facebook friend kind of killed that in the Super Bowl.
That's 83.
Yeah, this is the season I'm talking about.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the 80. Oh yeah, okay, sorry. I was thinking, Jack Squirt. It's a close game.
Terry's new best friend forever.
Yeah, we're on Facebook. Hey, what can I say? But if you don't remember, it's a close game in the Super Bowl. It's back and forth. At the time, it was 14-3. The Raiders were ahead, but the Redskins were starting to get you. You got to figure out they were figuring things out offensively. Late in the first half, most teams you just kneel it and you go to half. Yeah. They try a screen pass. Jack Squirt, literally the only career play. And if you happen to be listening, I don't mean that as a bad thing. I think you're perfectly happy with that. But that was literally his career play. He intercepts it, he scores, and then the game was out of hand. I'm sorry. I was thinking in my mind I was talking about the 82 Redskins. That's the best. I think that was the best Redskin team. Yeah, the one that beat the Dolphins. Yeah. Again, though, they beat a bad Dolphin. I mean, not a bad Dolphin that made the Super Bowl. But
I was going to say, like in '83, and it ended badly, but it started great. But also, they had some undrafted free agents. They had Bill Bates. that season, who started on the defense for a while, but ended up becoming who should be eventually in the Hall of Fame. Him and Steve Tasker, Hall of Fame special teamers. To me, special team is one of the top positions, and
they'll never get in, but they should.
Yeah. So same with Bill Bates, safety, and then also at the time, defensive tackle Mark Tuinei.
Yep.
He would not end up being a defensive tackle. He would be a tackle of sorts, but not a defensive tackle.
Well, and here's the thing we'll talk more about in the next episode, but for all the talk of Jimmy Johnson, and deserves all the credit.
Yeah.
Landry in the late 80s Cowboys drafted and signed some players that would end up being core key, including a Hall of Famer in Michael Irvin, core key players for those early 90 teams.
Yeah.
So they still, I understand that Landry wanted to continue coaching because it did feel like in the late 80s when you look at their drafts, they had started kind of figuring things out. And you look at a player like Mike Sherrard.
Yeah.
By all accounts, Mike Sherrard was drafted in the right spot. He just couldn't stay healthy in Dallas.
Yeah.
He goes to San Francisco, and for the 1 year that he's healthy, you kind of saw what Mike Sherrard, he didn't have 1,000 yards, but he still had like 600-700 as the second wide receiver because John Taylor had kind of started slowing down and Sherrard took his spot. So it did feel like, I get the idea why Landry thought that he could still go because they were going to draft Troy Aikman no matter what.
Yeah.
So you're going to still have Troy Aikman.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have traded Herschel Walker, though. That's the big deal. Landry would have never traded Herschel Walker because he'd have built the offense around Walker. But yeah, I can understand now. I didn't back then. I mean, I still think he should have been fired because he wasn't going to quit. But I can at least understand why he thought he still, like, I think he thought he was going to be able to turn things around.
Yeah. I mean, like I told you, it was really just after 64, it was one bad year. It was 88.
Yeah.
Everything else, 66 to 87, were not the worst.
No,
years.
I mean, even 87, 7-8-1, you have the scab games. They lose one of those if they don't play. And by the way, and we'll talk more about that in the next show. But one thing I do want to point out, and this is one of those like eureka moments that people are listening or watching, or probably, let's remember Dallas for the most part in the 70s and 80s spent the drafts in the 20s because of where they were success-wise.
Yeah.
So to be like, oh, well, they just stopped drafting. Well, yeah, but they also weren't drafting high, except for like in 77 when they made a trade and they got Tony Dorsett. Yeah. So I do want to make that point that, you know, that's what happened. All right, so now let's go to the 83 Cowboys. And this is where they still finished 12-4, but it felt like every good team they played, they lost to. They lost to the Raiders on a classic game where it was 40-38 back and forth. That's one of those games I just remember because it felt like every play they were living and dying on a play, and it just, again, that's when you start seeing the defense not be able to make the plays when they needed to.
Yeah.
They lost to the Chargers, but that was a really good Charger team, 24-13. They lost to the Raiders, the Redskins and the Raiders, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
But they finished 12-4 and they lose in the playoffs to the Rams. That was the game that they could have won. We'll talk about the 85 one, but that's a game they should have won, but they didn't. And so we go to the 84 season, and that's the year that they missed the playoffs for the first time since 74. Mm-hmm. It all came down to, again, we're talking about Buffalo. It all came down to that Miami game, back and forth Monday night game. In the last minute, or the last 2.5 minutes of scoring, this is the plays. Dolphins, Mark Clayton from Dan Marino makes it 21-14. Game's over. Oh, no, wait. The Cowboys, Danny White hits Tony Hill for 66 yards. It's tied.
Great play.
And then with a minute left, Dan Marino hits Mark Clayton on a play where I think it was Everson Walls, just missed the interception. He flashes forward. Clayton and the Cowboys missed the playoffs for the first time since 74. So there's not really enough talk about there, but that leads to what is my favorite season.
Well, I mean,
okay, go ahead.
This was the 25-year anniversary of the Cowboys.
Yeah, so we've learned that the 25 and the 50th, the Cowboys suck. And they had the big – I always loved –
also the franchise sale.
Yes, Clint Murchison to Bum Bright.
Yeah, I mean,
and that'll play more coming up. But just remember this: for all the talk about people blaming Jerry Jones for Tom Landry, Bum Bright's what got Tom Landry fired.
Correct.
It literally was in the contract; you had to fire him.
And then also in '84, it's the 25-year anniversary. Dallas missed the playoffs. They were 9-7, but also there was a lot of losses during this season. Pearson retired.
Yeah.
There was a lot of retirement.
Yes.
Drew Pearson, tight end Billy Joe Dupree, defensive end Harvey Martin. That was more cocaine related. Fullback Robert Newhouse and Pat Donovan, the offensive tackle. And the Cowboys traded Bush Johnson to the Broncos. Now, so there was an influx of talent that came in, obviously, with Mike Renfro, the receiver.
Very underrated from the former Oiler.
Yeah.
He's the one that made the catch in the 79 AFC title game that probably should have been considered a catch, but they ruled it out.
In today's age, it would have been a catch.
Yeah, because he had 2 feet down. Yeah. But, I mean, I understand back then you can't. But that 79 season, the Steelers had so many things break right for them.
Correct.
Which is kind of like the 95 Cowboys.
Now, they replaced Billy Joe Dupree. The Cowboys have Doug Cosby.
But it was so you know me. I'm a big Doug Cosby guy.
Yes.
Because, but Doug Cosby was really good. But what they didn't have anymore was a tight end that could block in Billy Joe Dupree and then a tight end that could catch in Butch Johnson.
Yeah.
Doug Cosby was a great wide receiver tight end. He was not the greatest blocking. I kind of feel like, honestly, he's Jason Witten. For some reason, Jason Witten got this big reputation as being a great blocker.
I was saying that.
I never felt that he was a great blocker. I never understood. It was the same thing like when he would have a penalty. Well, Jason Witten barely has penalties. Well, then you'd look up the stats, and he was one of the most penalized tight ends in the league at the time. I love Jason Witten.
I remember seeing a lot of the plays and a lot of plays that broke free, and he would be the main reason why Dallas would get touchdowns or long plays for a first down.
DeMarco Murray was the main reason.
Oh, okay.
But really, no, seriously, Doug Cosby and Jason Witten, they're kind of the same. If you put Doug Cosby into that era of Dallas, and I mean that as a compliment, not as a knock on Witten. They both were really great. I've told you that. I think one of the first conversations we had, I was like, I think Doug Cosby's one of the most underrated tight ends. I think you were like, it's Doug Cosby. But you looked him up. I still remember the day you looked him up because you messaged me like, dude, Doug Cosby was actually really, really good. I'm like, I know.
I remember the name. I just don't remember anything about him.
Okay, so for remembering, I know we've said it, but we'll re-say it. You and I are different ages.
Yes.
So you became a fan in 93.
Yes.
You were 7 years old?
9.
9. I was 7 years old in 1982. So that's why there's that difference.
Oh, yeah.
Sure. But anyway, and also Harvey Martin was from A&M Commerce. Guns up. Luis Perez tonight. AFL or XFL, whatever that league's called.
XFL, yes.
I can't believe they made
Bring it home.
Bring it home, Arlington.
It's coming home, Arlington.
Arlington. Why is it? This is the word Arlington. Look, I love Arlington. We love Dallas Fort Worth.
Because The Rock wanted to name the city that they actually played in.
But doesn't the Dallas Renegades sound better? Anyway. All right, so let's go back. Let's go back to my favorite season as a kid.
Okay, here we go.
The 1985 Dallas Cowboys. And we're going to end the show on this. Here's why I like them. A, because I was a kid. B, because...
Oh, can I mention one more thing? I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
In 84, one of their draft picks...
Oh, yeah.
...was all-world sprinter Carl Lewis.
Yep.
All right, that's all.
That's what Dallas did back in the day. That's how they got Bob Hayes. Yeah. I don't think Carl Lewis could have made it in football.
He would not have made it in football.
So here's the thing about Dallas in 85.
Yeah.
This is the weakest team to make the playoffs in this stretch.
Why?
This might be one because they weren't good. But I think this legitimately was Tom Landry's best year because he did it. We hear the term, Mike Zimmer used to get this in the early 2000s. He did it with smoke and mirrors.
Yeah.
Because if you look at the NFC East, 10-6 Dallas, 10-6 Giants, 10-6 Redskins, 7-9 Eagles. That's really good.
Yeah.
You know what Dallas did well? They beat all those teams. They beat Washington twice. They beat the Giants twice. They did split with the Eagles and they split with the Cardinals, but they were too far down to hurt. The big difference between 85 and 84 was 84, they didn't win those games. 85, they did, and my God, they were ugly wins. They beat the Giants 28-21. The second to the last season of the game of the year, that was kind of known as that was for the NFC East. And they basically win it because in a tight game, Jim Jeffcoat intercepts a pass, bounced the pass. Jim Jeffcoat was brilliant at this. He does this like multiple times in his career against the Giants. So he did it again in 93 or 94. Sure. Ball bounces off a defender, and Jim Jeffcoat catches it. He goes 65 yards, and then Mike Renfro catches a pass, and they go up 21-14. They go up 28-14, and they have to hold on, but they win. And that won the division. The problem was, in the playoffs, they had to play the Rams. And at this point, the Rams and Eric Dickerson, the flex defense that Tom Landry created, it had lost its mystique. And they absolutely got destroyed, 20-0. Eric Dickerson had, I think at the time, the most playoff rushing yards in a game until Timmy Smith in the Super Bowl a few years later. 248 yards, 34 carries, 2 touchdowns. Dieter Brock,
here we go.
He completed 6 passes. Is that the worst performance a quarterback has had in a playoff win? Because it's pretty close. I know Bob Greasy, but
Jimmy Garoppolo.
What was his? Was it
2019 NFC title game?
I guess you could technically say Colin Kaepernick against the Packers, but Colin Kaepernick also ran for 250 yards, so it was a little different.
A QB playoff record. Yeah.
But yeah, Dieter Brock, the CFL legend, was 6 of 22 for 50 yards and an interception. But for all the talk about the offense or the defense, Danny White, 217 yards but 3 interceptions, and once again, Tony Dorsett, 58 yards. I'm not saying he was I hate the whole, like, are you clutch or not? But when you look at Tony Dorsett in the playoffs, 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83, and then 85 for Dallas. Yeah. His yardages are 85, 71, 66, 65, 100, 96, 87, 160, 51, 41, 110. He has, of all those years, he has 3 100-yard postseason games. We don't talk about that back then. You didn't talk about a running back being clutch. And I'm not saying he's not clutch, but I'm just pointing out that, a Hall of Fame player, a guy who, when he retired, was 2nd in the league in rushing yards. In the playoffs, he tended to struggle. Now, again, the playoffs are tougher, but I mean, again,
I don't want to put the onus on him because the defense was not that great.
No, but
outside of the sacks and interceptions, the 85 Cowboy defense was not great.
No. I'm just talking about his whole career because you want to go back and you want to look at, I'm just going to say, Emmitt Smith. All right. Emmitt Smith, playoffs, 91, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99. Yeah. 105, 80, 114, 108, 132, 150, 116. That's the difference in a guy being really good Hall of Fame and being a guy that leads the league the whole league in rushing. And again, I don't mean that to knock Tony Dorsett. Tony Dorsett was legitimately, him and Randy White and Too Tall and Harvey Martin were my favorite players growing up. That was the crew that I ran with. Yep. But
you ran with this crew?
Oh, yeah, we're in all the time. Me and Harvey Martin used to hang out.
Oh, okay.
Beautiful Harvey Martin show. But at the end of the day, again, it's the Dallas had so many great players, but at key moments in this 78 to 85 era, they just couldn't quite make the plays. Yeah. I think we're putting this one to bed, my friend.
I mean, we got through 78 to 85. We got through the elite years of the Cowboys where those great mid-70s draft picks were still relevant and they were still in their prime from 78 to 82. And then we got to a point where in 83 they were still relevant, and then they lost their last 2 regular season games, lost a playoff game.
That's the change. 85 was the anomaly. Well, okay, so we will talk 86 in the next show because 86 legitimately had a chance to be special.
But that gives us 1999 vibes.
Yeah, it really does, and we'll talk about that at a point because we're eventually we're going to do a show where we talk about the kind of like the missing rings.
And the reason why we didn't talk about the rest of the years up until 92 is because it just takes so long.
Yes.
Just one show right here. How long have we been talking for?
Almost an hour and 20 minutes.
Yeah. So, I mean,
and we've left much on the table of just the seasons we talked about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's at least 30 minutes I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Just from the notes I have. So I just really feel that obviously the lights at the end of the tunnel for this team, it is just, there's a lot that's going to happen over the next few years that's going to get to that point.
Yep.
That if I was living in this time period as a knowledgeable football fan, I would never have expected. And I can't wait to talk about it next.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, the what makes 90 so great was it felt like it came out of nowhere.
Yeah. Almost like it should not have happened.
Yeah, but we'll talk about that next time. As we want to remind you, we have a league season 3 retrospective we're actually going to record today as well. That's going to go up. We did the 1977, a look back at the Super Bowl champion Dallas Cowboys in the league. Next month, we'll do the 86 to 91 Cowboys. Yeah. That's going to be rough. There's not a lot of pretty until 91. Yeah. Oh, I guess 90. They finished 7-9.
Well, I mean, there's
the Babe Laufenberg game.
The trade we're going to dissect a lot.
Oh yeah, we're going to talk about
like
when
18 players involved.
Well, dude, there's really 2 trades if you want to talk about it. Charles Haley and there's a lot to talk about.
The Herschel Walker.
Yeah,
trade
I know. You want to talk about the Rod Hill trade? We'll talk about that. But we'll do all that next time. And again, check us out on YouTube at L4 Media Company. Find us on Facebook, Outdrink the Coverage, on Twitter at OutDrinkU. Email us, odtcnfl@gmail.com. Until next time, he's intern Noe. I'm Terry Bennett. This has been Outdrink the Coverage, a look back at the 78 to 85 Cowboys.
Yep.